Hello, and welcome back to my channel. There are many accounts throughout history of women who dress as men and go off to fight gloriously in battle, and the Civil War has no shortage of examples in this. One of the most well-known women who joined the Army is actually from the state of Michigan. Gentle Annie Etheridge's story plays like a movie. She was a woman who did whatever she could to help others, like easing the pain of the wounded and spurring many a Union soldier to fight harder. Let's learn more about her. There's very little known of Annie's childhood or of her early married life, but most accounts agree that Anna Lorinda Blair was born on May 3rd, 1839 in Wayne County, Michigan. The Blairs were a wealthy family, but Annie's mother, Cynthia, died when Annie was young. And shortly after her mother's death, Annie's father, John, moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. When she was only 16 years old, Annie married David Kellogg, and virtually nothing is known of him. But he did die soon after their marriage. In 1860, she married James Etheridge, and in early 1861, Annie and her husband traveled to Michigan to visit her father, who had moved back there, and to care for him. In addition to caring for her father, Annie worked in a hospital, and she tried to reform the poor conditions that she saw there, but before any of her plans could be put into place, the Civil War broke out. James Etheridge enlisted in the 2nd Michigan Infantry, and Annie joined as well. She was one of 20 women to serve as a vivanderie, or a daughter of the regiment. There were many women like this, and a vivanderie is basically a French name for women who are attached to military regiments for different reasons. And vivanderies did many things for the soldiers. They would cook, do laundry, and write letters for the soldiers. Annie also tended to the sick and wounded. She comforted the dying, and she also encouraged the soldiers to fight. She became known as Michigan Annie, the brave little sergeant in petticoats, and Gentle Annie. That last nickname came from an 1856 Stephen Foster song. Annie's first combat experience was on July 18 during the Battle of Blackburn's Ford in Virginia. She nursed the wounded and carried water to the dying soldiers. According to those soldiers who served with Annie, she, quote, conducted herself with such modesty and propriety, and was at the same time so full of patriotism and courage, that she was a universal favorite with the soldiers as well as the officers. She carried pistols for protection and frequently rode into the front lines to help wounded soldiers. Even when her wastrel husband deserted for reasons unknown, she remained with the regiment to serve. She was, quote, brave, constant, tender, possessed nerves of steel, and willing to join the fight as necessary, encouraged the men to greater valor, or remained in the rear treating wounds. Annie was involved in many battles in 1862. Most specifically, during the Battle of Chantilly, General Philip Kearny witnessed her bravery. He told her and others that he would be recommending that she be promoted to sergeant and be given a horse. Unfortunately, the general was killed in battle, and as a result, Annie did not receive the promotion or the pay raise that went with it. She was, however, given a horse, and she used it well. After the Battle of Antietam, the 2nd Michigan Infantry was sent to Tennessee to fight with the armies there, but Annie decided to remain with the Army of the Potomac and enlisted in the 3rd Michigan. Later, during the 2nd Battle of Bull Run, Annie was almost captured while attending to the wounded. Against her wishes, she was eventually forced to follow her regiment when the rebels came near. She finished out the year of 1862 by aiding the men during the Battle of Fredericksburg. In 1863, Annie continued to act as a combat medic. During the Battle of Chancellorsville, Annie was in the rear of the line, encouraging the soldiers and waiting to help the wounded. When the Union men saw her, they cheered, which unfortunately revealed their position to the rebels. The enemy fired in that direction. An officer put his horse between Annie and a tree that she had taken shelter behind. Another volley was fired at them, and a ball zipped by her, hitting the officer protecting her and killing him immediately. Another bullet did graze her hand and slightly wounded her horse. That same year, she received the Kearny Cross, a military award given to any Union officer who had performed acts of extreme bravery and heroism in the face of the enemy. In May of 1864, Annie found herself in the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. A fellow soldier remembered that Annie met a number of soldiers who were retreating. She immediately attempted to encourage them to fight, as she had done many times before that during the war. When simple motivation didn't work, Annie shamed them into doing their duty and also offered to lead them into the fight. She did this under heavy fire from the enemy Confederates, and she became known as a woman who inspired the men to deeds of valor by her own example, her courage, and her presence of mind. When General Ulysses S. Grant became commander of the Army of the Potomac, all women were ordered to leave the camp. In July, Annie was sent to City Point near Petersburg to help at the hospital there. Officers who knew of Annie's importance to the Union Army signed a petition to actually try and allow her to remain with the main army, but Grant denied it, and Annie was forced to stay at City Point. However, Annie completely disobeyed Grant's orders, as records show that she was in multiple battles that summer, and being the devoted nurse that she was, she often rode back to look in on her boys. Later, during the Chickahominy campaign, she worked for the Hospital Transport Service, which would send wounded men from parts of Alexandria, Virginia, to hospitals in the larger cities like Philadelphia, New York City, and Washington City. In early 1865, Annie was allowed to return to her Viviandre duties in the Army of the Potomac, and after Robert E. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia at Appomattox Courthouse, she returned to Michigan. On July 1, Annie was mustered out of the Army in Detroit. Annie Etheridge left a lasting impact on many soldiers. Color Sergeant Daniel Crotty of the 3rd Michigan Infantry said, "The world never produced but very few such women. For she is along with us through storm and sunshine, in the heat of the battle caring for the wounded, and in the camp looking after the poor sick soldier, and to have a smile and a cheering word for everyone who comes in her way. Every soldier is alike to her. She is with us to administer to all our little wants, which are not few. To praise her would not be enough, but suffice to say that as long as one of the old Third shall live, she will always be held in the greatest esteem, and remembered with kindly feelings for her goodness and virtues." After the war, Annie continued to help others. She worked for the United States Treasury Department, and again cared for her ailing father. It is unknown what her father, John Blair, was doing during the war. It's also unknown what happened to James Etheridge during the war, but he must have died somehow, as Annie later married Charles Hook, a one-armed veteran from Connecticut. After many years of petitioning, Annie began to receive a monthly pension of $25 for her service to the United States, which was very well deserved. Annie died at Georgetown University on January 23, 1913, 3 years after her husband Charles's death. She's buried in Arlington National Cemetery near him. I feel that Annie Etheridge is a woman whose story deserves to be told many times. She met with so many issues in her life and endured the hardships of war up close and personal, yet she never gave up. Annie was inducted into Michigan Women's Hall of Fame in 2010. Her story and the way she lived her life is an inspiration to both men and women. If you want to learn more about Annie, I would definitely recommend this book here. It's great from grades 4 all the way up to adults and gives a lot of information about her life and how amazing of a woman that she was. Who are some individuals that inspire you? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.